Hi there and welcome to the Byline podcast from the Byline Times. The Byline Times, it's what the papers don't say, what radio doesn't report and what telly doesn't tell you. My name is Adrian Goldberg and this time Kamala Harris takes on Trump. We're joined by former British diplomat Alexandra Hall, who served in Washington at the time of Brexit and who is in DC right now. Alex is a writer for Byline Times and co-host of the Disorder podcast. Alex, welcome. And on recent podcasts, we've spoken to Jay Rosen, who is a professor of media at New York University. We've spoken to Heidi Sigmund Kuda from the Rad Pod. Both of them paint a pretty dystopian picture of the United States and its potential relationship with the UK and Europe if Donald Trump wins in November. Do you share their pessimism?
100%. And I think all those fears were legitimized by the Republican National Convention last week, which I had the dubious privilege of watching night after night. And I think the appointment or the designation of Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate, and then the tone of most of the speeches during the convention pretty much gave us confirmation that Trump is not a changed man after his near assassination attempt. He is the same Donald Trump, determined to campaign on an isolationist, America first, protectionist ticket. His selection of Vance shows a lot of confidence that he doesn't need to reach out to the middle ground or moderates, but that he's going to double down on this America first message. And he is going to continue with this very negative rhetoric about killers and criminals swarming America as they cross over the border as immigrants, attacking elites and the deep state. And I might also add, in light of Joe Biden's decision to step aside for this year's race, it was particularly striking to me that amidst all the tributes given to Joe Biden, including from former Vice President Pence and Republican Senator Mitt Romney, J.D. Vance and Trump have both issued the most graceless comments in wake of that. Trump calling him the worst president ever, and J.D. Vance accusing Kamala Harris of not being able to represent America as she's a childless cat lady. I mean, really astonishing. Their agenda is a very dangerous one. It's a dangerous one for American workers in terms of privileging big tech and screwing ordinary consumers with high tariffs. It's a dangerous one for American democracy because they have a plan to clear out what they claim to be the deep state, but is in fact the structure of governance that helps keep America operating according to the Constitution, to continue to appoint very conservative judges to the Supreme Court, to continue to pursue an agenda that is very hostile to abortion. And it's very dangerous internationally because they have an affinity for dictators like Vladimir Putin. They are hostile to America's allies. Trump, in his acceptance speech, called them so-called allies. They are skeptical about NATO and international alliances, and they are skeptical about supporting Ukraine. So yes, it's a very dangerous moment.
Yeah, and in terms of the UK specifically and our role in NATO, Trump has threatened to quit NATO on a number of occasions in the past. That may just be posturing. It may be an attempt to persuade European governments to put their hands in their pockets and pay for more of their defence than hitherto has been the case. And you might argue from a US taxpayer's point of view, that's not a bad argument. But do you think there is a risk to NATO overall? There is the possibility that it could somehow fall apart if Trump is elected again?
I think there's a huge risk to NATO, not necessarily because any Trump presidency would formally withdraw from the alliance. And in fact, to guard against that possibility, the US Congress last year passed legislation mandating that the president cannot act alone to withdraw the US from NATO. So it's not a question of formally withdrawing from NATO. The risk comes from the doubt that NATO allies will now have about whether or not America would actually come to their aid in the event of Russian aggression. And that's a doubt that has a genuine basis because Trump has said any country that doesn't pay its dues, he's like, bring it on, Russia. And even if he doesn't mean it, even if there is a legacy in Congress of internationalist senators and House of Representative delegates, the very fact of raising that doubt increases the risk of adventurism by aggressors like Russia and China. So, yes, it's going to put huge strain on NATO, which is already responding. I mean, I do think I don't like to give the man credit, but the very fear of a Trump presidency, plus the very real invasion of Ukraine, has already galvanized NATO members to increase their contributions to NATO. But they can't match the American contribution. And without America, NATO doesn't have the capability. And it's really, the Europeans need to get their act together and be very serious about defense. And that also means Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I mean, the geopolitical reality is that in Western and Northern Europe, we live under Pax Americana. But if America isn't willing to pay for that piece, then obviously we're going to have to dig deeper into our pockets. That may be, as I say, reasonable from a US taxpayer's point of view, but it's only likely to embolden President Putin. And Trump, of course, has been accused of being altogether too favorable to Putin. He's also endorsed President Xi in the past and spoke in admiring tones about how he rules over 14 million people with a rod of iron.
I mean, I also think Trump has a very inflated sense of himself. I mean, again, looking at his speech last week at the Republican National Convention, he was issuing his usual self-praise about the Ukraine war wouldn't have happened, that the Israel-Gaza war wouldn't have happened, that he would sort of sort all these things out overnight. I mean, to be critical, it is true that these issues have developed on Joe Biden's watch, not on Trump's watch. And Trump did actually give more arms to Ukraine when he was president. So, there is some argument to say that the very unpredictability of Trump may actually keep dictators at bay because Trump is the kind of whack job that might do something incredibly stupid. But it's a highly volatile and highly dangerous situation. The Europeans have been negligent in paying for their own defence. They have relied for far too long on American support. They've wanted to continue their social programs to their citizens while American taxpayers pay for their defence. That's not sustainable.
Kamala Harris then steps into the breach. I know that at the recent Byline Festival in Dartington, you feared that Biden would have to stand down. And I know that, again, I've spoken on this podcast, particularly to Heidi, who feels that it's a kind of victory for Russian disinformation. But I think many people, even if they have sympathy with the plight that Joe Biden found himself in and the scale of disinformation and misinformation that went with it, I think there was an argument that said, not based on his age, but based on his competence, that it perhaps was time for him to step down.
Well, at Byline Times, actually, I disagreed with Heidi. I didn't fear that Biden would step down. I was desperate for him to do so and absolutely furious at the Democrat Party and the people closest around Biden for having allowed it to get to this stage. I think none of us were prepared for the scene we saw in the Biden-Trump debate when it became horribly apparent to all of us that Biden actually really was declining mentally and physically, because for months they've been spinning the narrative, though, that it's all fine. And I personally, quite a lot of American friends of mine, feel really angry with the Democrats. But that is behind us. He has now taken the decision to step aside, which I think is absolutely the right thing to do. And it's now potentially upending the race. It's injecting new enthusiasm. It's injecting new energy. The Democrats are clearly energized. It's not yet a done deal that Kamala Harris will be the nominee. I mean, she's the presumptive favorite, and she's picking up endorsements literally every 5 minutes. There's another senior Democrat figure or governor, and most of the chairs of the party at every state level have already endorsed her. So the momentum is clearly going her way. But what I've really seen is just this huge outburst of energy and enthusiasm. She's already raised millions of dollars in new contributions. And I think about what Nikki Haley said earlier this year when she was still in the running against Donald Trump. And she said, whichever party first gets rid of their 80-year-old candidate will win the race. Well, the Democrats have done what the Republicans have singularly failed to do. The Democrats and Joe Biden himself, who deserves credit for this, have finally recognized that their candidate was not the right candidate. Not just because of what's at stake in going against Trump, but I mean, Biden, he was failing in communicating terms anyway. He was not making the case successfully, not just why Trump would be dangerous, but the importance of supporting Ukraine, the importance of free markets, the importance of alliances. He wasn't making that case. So I think there was a huge question about, even if he had been able to win in November, whether he would be able to govern effectively for another 4 years. So we now have this great shot of excitement. The Democrats have recognized their candidate was flawed. The Republicans are sticking with a candidate who is highly flawed, who is now the old guy in the race. And maybe if more people pay attention to what he says at his rallies, we'll come to see that actually he really doesn't make a lot of sense either. He's not really very coherent. And the very fact that he selected J.D. Vance as his vice president candidate may, I personally hope, turn out to have been a huge mistake, because the two of them together are reminding people quite how nasty and vindictive and dangerous that ticket is. So I think the Democrats now have a new shot.
And Kamala Harris can speak with real conviction, and I suspect with an authority that Joe Biden never could, about abortion rights and women's rights in general, which in previous US elections, in recent US elections, non-presidential elections, have proven to be a powerful motivator for people to, and women in particular, to come out and vote.
Well, I have to say, it's nice to hear a woman making the case for the abortion rights issue, rather than this being a debate between various men arguing about what women should and shouldn't do. I mean, people are entirely entitled to their own views on abortion, and I respect those who have concerns about the accessibility of abortion or preventing people from being able to access abortion. I'm horrified at J.D. Vance's stance, which has previously opposed abortion even in cases of rape. He also has opposed women leaving their husbands even when they've been battered and abused, part of the sanctity of marriage. So actually, I think Kamala Harris will be quite an effective spokesperson on those issues, because it's no longer a debate between men about how women should behave. So I think that's very good. And I really hope, Kamala Harris as vice president, she's been running the abortion messaging for the campaign, but she now needs to broaden this. The election can't be won or lost on the issue of abortion. It has to be about national security, about American values, about America's positioning in the world, and also about who has the better vision for supporting America's working classes. Because where the Democrats have lost in recent years is a little bit how Labour lost a bit of ground to the Conservatives in recent years. It's the sense that they had got a little bit out of touch, a little bit too woke, a little bit too liberal elites in the cities, and had lost touch with working class men and women. Keir Starmer has successfully managed to pull Labour out of that perception. And that's what Kamala Harris needs to do. And that's why, if she is the nominee, her selection as her VP candidate is very important. To my mind, it absolutely cannot be an East or West Coast sort of a liberal progressive individual, somebody seen as advancing that sort of slightly woke agenda. It needs to be someone from a kind of working class Rust Belt, in touch with the concerns of ordinary workers, trying to win back that vote.
It always baffles me. I don't live in the United States, but I have visited on more than one occasion when I see Black and Hispanic voters turning out to vote for Trump. I'm not sure I'll ever quite get my head around that, but Kamala Harris, by virtue of who she is, has an appeal, I would suggest, to minority voters.
Well, I do understand why not every African American or every Hispanic person would vote for a Democrat. I feel the Democrats have taken their votes for granted. And identity politics of sort of building constituencies, we're going to go for, women or African Americans or Hispanics or the Latinos or the ghastly acronym Latinx. This sort of categorization of people, an assumption that they vote based on their skin color or their gender, I think is a losing ticket. Why not treat everybody as voting on issues like education, healthcare, jobs, the economy, and to sort of assume that you just have the African American vote in the bag, I think is really dangerous. And a lot of the Hispanic community, particularly those who have immigrated and came in through legal routes, they don't like the illegal immigration, the sort of crossing the border, because they feel that is turning communities against everybody who looks Hispanic, because they're all treated as if they're illegal. And then they get stopped and searched and their papers checked to see if they're legal. And not every Black American shares the same ideology as every Democrat. So again, I think the Democrats have made a mistake by playing too much identity politics. They have to get away from that narrative. That's my view.
Kamala Harris has served, of course, as Biden's vice president. What impact has she made in that role?
One of the reasons why people think Joe Biden took so long to decide to step down is allegedly, though who knows, I personally think there was a little bit of stubbornness there and reluctance to let go, but it's just speculation. But there was quite a lot of punditry comment that there were real concerns about whether Vice President Harris would actually be an effective president. And part of that stems from precisely this issue that we were just talking about, this perception that she was designated vice president, not necessarily because of her brilliant accomplishments and achievements, but because she was a Black woman, because Joe Biden said he was going to appoint a Black woman as vice president. So then he just looked around and found one, which, if I was a Black African American woman, I'd feel a bit offended by that. So she's had that label attached to her that she was only selected to tick a sort of identity box. And then, of course, the questions came, well, why did you appoint her if you didn't think she was capable of being president? Now Biden has endorsed her and said, no, it was an excellent choice. She'll be an excellent candidate. But now she has to prove that she wasn't appointed just because she ticked a box, but because she really brought something to the ticket. But many people feel she wasn't that successful as vice president. She was given the dossier of handling the immigration dossier and had to admit on a live TV interview a year into that role that she hadn't yet actually visited the border with Mexico, which I personally find astonishing. That would be absolutely the first thing I did. I'm not running for president. I mean, it would be absolutely the first thing I did.
Obviously,
Yeah.
you would have our vote
So
if you did.
I'm not quite there yet. So there were concerns about how she handled that. There were allegations that the staff in her office were unhappy. There were allegations, there were tensions between her and Biden. Well, now she has to prove that she can rise to the occasion. She was a successful attorney general. She was a pretty capable and articulate senator when she was California's senator. So now's her chance. And I've just watched her give her first speech, her first public remarks since Biden decided to step down. And I have to say, she spoke very well. I mean, she's young, she's energetic, she's articulate. She smiles, she engages with her audience, she turns around to look to people. Unlike Donald Trump, she didn't talk about herself once.
I love the fact that at the age of 59, she's considered young. There's hope for
Yeah,
all of
there's
us.
hope for me. I know I'm young. There's absolute hope for all of us.
What ticket then will she stand on? You're encouraging her to move away from identity politics. Obviously, abortion and women's rights will be part of the package because that is one of the key areas of distinction for the Democrats relative to the Republicans. What else can she do to cut through to that mass of voters, the swing voters, who will make the difference in November?
So, I have to tread carefully here. I'm only recently an American citizen. I mean, I have lived and worked here for on and off for 30 years, and my job as a diplomat was to analyze politics. So, I mean, I bring some experience and credentials to it, but at the end of the day, I'm a fairly new American. So, with a little bit of humility, I personally think her best choice is to choose a governor with proven administrative experience, a Democrat who has succeeded in winning election in a Republican leaning state. So that would include Roy Cooper, the Democrat governor of North Carolina, a state that has been purple in recent years, a mix of red and blue, but has been trending more Republican in recent years. Andy Beshear, the governor in Kentucky, which is the home state of Mitch McConnell in the South, a fairly Republican state, but he's been a Democrat governor. Or Josh Shapiro, the governor in Pennsylvania, again, another bellwether state. I mean, North Carolina and Pennsylvania are both critical states in the election. There's only a handful of states which will really decide this election. Michigan, where, of course, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor, is another potential running mate for her. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada.
And is that because you think those Democratic governors of Republican or traditional Republican leaning states will have better antennae as her running mate for the issues that might just turn enough Republicans over to the Democrats?
Absolutely. I think they would bring two things. One, they would bring a proven track record of administrative success. Kamala Harris has not run a government. She's been a vice president, she's been an attorney general, she's been a senator, but actually running the machinery of government. So previous experience as a governor is really good. And if you can show evidence that as you were governor, your economy did well, that's really good. But yes, the other issue is that Democrat governors in Republican states have presumably managed to convince voters who may be culturally conservative or Republican inclined that nevertheless they can engage those voters, they know how to motivate them, and they offer them something. But if Kamala Harris were to choose somebody more on the left, like Gavin Newsom from California, who, by the way, whose record, I mean, governance in California is a mess. So maybe liberal elites quite like the idea of Gavin Newsom because he's articulate and punchy and fighty, but he's not going to speak to middle America. There's been some talk about Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of State for Transport, being a very good person to go up against J.D. Vance. And Pete Buttigieg is very articulate, he's attractive. He also has previous military experience like J.D. Vance, but I think he would probably be too much associated with the Biden administration. And to the extent that there is an anti-incumbency mood in the air, I think bringing someone from outside the Biden administration would be good. And also, though I really hate to say this, many of your listeners may be aware that Pete Buttigieg is gay. Whether there is enough out there for America to swallow the first female president, the first one of Asian African heritage, and the first gay person as vice president, that's a lot on the ticket. And I think it gives a gift to the nasty people on the Republican side just to sort of attack them in quite unattractive terms.
You think she can win?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, referring back to the Republican National Convention last week, it was unprecedented in terms of energy, enthusiasm, motivation for the candidate. You had all the people in the audience wearing their little pillows in sympathy with President Trump. There was real energy and enthusiasm. And then the last night of the convention, we had a series of utter crackpots coming to speak, including Hulk Hogan, the wrestling guy, sort of ripping off his shirt, and the president of an extreme fighting organization. And then you had Trump give his speech, and his speech was just long and rambling and boring and I just suddenly thought, wow, these guys are eminently beatable. And anybody watching that last night of the convention will be reminded of why they didn't like Trump first time around. A week ago, I would say the momentum was all behind Trump. The Democrats now have new momentum, new energy. They often say elections are also won on the enthusiasm factor. The opinion polls a couple of weeks ago reflected the fact that most Americans were unhappy with both the candidates. There was a real lack of enthusiasm. But Trump had rallied his party while the Democrats looked to be in disarray about will Biden run or not. Now that has been flipped. There is real energy. There is real enthusiasm. I mean, I'm just looking at my Twitter feed and there are just people storming on there going, let's go, let's donate. When is Taylor Swift going to endorse her? And suddenly the Democrats that looked all over the place, they are all rallying around Kamala Harris. As I said, it's not a done deal yet, but the momentum is there. But there is that real sense of energy. The other issue is that quite a lot of people who thought Biden shouldn't step aside were saying there isn't enough time for the Democrats to organize themselves. It takes years to get a campaign up and running. And again, I just don't agree with that. I mean, had Biden announced he was stepping down in 2022 and said, I'm going to let a new candidate emerge, the Republicans would have spent the last 18 months hammering that candidate. Whereas actually the Democrats now, they are the ones with the energy and the excitement. The race has come alive and they know exactly who they're facing in terms of Trump and Vance. So they can design their ticket and their messages exactly for what they've got. So I personally think this plays in their favor.
Great stuff, Alex. As always, thank you, Alex Hall. And don't forget as well to listen to her on the Disorder podcast and read her as well on the Byline Times. Before we go, just a reminder, we've got a fantastic new audio stream on Byline. It's called bylineaudio.com, and you can listen to fantastic podcasts like Utter Bollocks, which is wonderful, funny myth busting from John Mitchinson and Otto English. Soon you'll be able to listen to Adventures in Americana with Hardeep Natharu and Bonnie Greer. And you can listen to this podcast as well. If you take out a premium subscription, all of that, by the way, is free to listen to. But if you take out a premium subscription, you'll be able to listen to additional content and an ad-free version of this podcast. So thanks very much indeed for listening. Thank you to Alex. And we'll see you again soon. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Byline.